rolling? All right.
Okay guys, hi, I'm Caitlin. My talk is assessing diversity through history lessons and math connections, and what that means is I want to talk to you about how talking about history in kind of a global way versus just a national way really gives us a lesson on diversity, and we can connect that to math or any other subject in the classroom. So first let's talk about what book I chose. It's History Lessons and How Textbooks Around the World Portray U.S. History by Daniel Lindeman and Kyle Ward. I chose this text because this is kind of a question that I've always had in my history classes, like, is this the whole story? Like, how is it presented from the other side of the story? And this is what this book talks about. We have a problem. The authors talk about, in the beginning, how in America, like, we just talk about, America. We don't really, even when we're talking about global events, don't really touch on, like, we don't really talk about other countries as much as we should. So that's why that's the problem that this book addresses. Here's the picture of the book. So let's talk about our author, Kyle Ward. Here's a picture of him. He was a teacher for 2 decades. He taught history, and then he was a college professor and taught history. So that's pretty cool. He had this problem in his class, like in many math classes do, where people would say, history is boring. So he started to have this dialogue with his students, like, what do you think history is? And that he said one of his favorite responses that he ever got to this was the study of old people. He would use that to say no and explain, really what history is all about, and that it's always changing. He believed that the perspective changes, and how we present history changes with what's going on in the times, and that's what inspired him to write this book. It's shown right here. It's called Not Written in Stone: Learning and Unlearning American History Through 200 Years of Textbooks. And what that book is about is kind of like how history, U.S. history, like how it was presented and how that has changed from the beginning to the end, like the same topics presented a completely different way. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some common history beliefs refuted. This is kind of what the book's about, and I wish, it's such a good book, I wish I could talk to you guys about every single one of them, but I'm just going to go through 10 of the big ones really, really fast for you guys, so you'll kind of get a feel of what we're talking about here. So first, I don't know why the Great Depression is up here first. Hold on. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so Vikings were actually the first people to explore the New World, to explore North America, not Columbus. It's the Vikings, and I thought that was really cool. Also, the Puritans, we kind of saw them as these peaceful, religious heroes that saved the day and like made the base of America. But in the British textbooks, they were kind of seen like their neighbors were annoyed by them. They saw them as kind of snobbish. Queen Elizabeth said, quote, they were dangerous to kingly rule, right, which is way different than we would think. The War of 1812, a lot of British students never even learned about this war because they were more concerned with 1814 and Waterloo. Some say that the War of 1812 is where the name for the White House came from, because a lot of they had to repair the White House, and a lot of that ended up being white, and so that was kind of started that name. Also, a lot of people don't know that Canada kind of was involved in the War of 1812. With the Civil War, in the U.S. is taught as kind of mostly or only an American event, and that's definitely not true. Britain kind of rooted for the South a little bit. Canada was involved, but the whole world saw this. It was a big deal, and it affected the whole world. It affected change in Canada and everything like that. We had the Great War, or World War I, and I thought it was interesting how different textbooks portrayed it different ways. The French textbook was very self-critical. It said, that the army was kind of ended up being a cult. They had a lot of propaganda, a lot of songs and everything, and it was very critical of itself. Canada was proud. Canada's textbook, it reads, it's like, oh yeah, we're so brave in the fight and everything. Italy portrayed it as this very, very sad, gory story. I mean, they said their people were starving. A lot of soldiers got killed when, like, just because the army was doing that, okay, this group of soldiers were going to kill you all because the army failed. And, like, I cried while reading the Italian story. It was really sad. So then we have the Great Depression, as you can see, and also we need to keep in mind that this did not just affect the U.S. like it's taught in America. This was a worldwide thing that like Europe was hit hard by the war. So when America like had this Great Depression, the rest of the world was feeling it too. It was also called the crisis of 1929 in the United States, and it was also called the Great Economic Crisis of the 1930s. I didn't know you knew that Great Depression had different names. We have the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban Missile Crisis. And both of those, I put this up here, I thought it was really interesting that in both of those, the Cuban textbook kind of says that, or kind of portrays both of these things as, hey, look, America was like being super aggressive, and they were breaking laws, and we were just trying to defend ourselves. So it's a lot different from how we think of it. Hostage crisis in Iran, this was kind of like, they were really, we saw this as a horrible, horrible thing. They were kind of glad that they were the center of attention. They were like, we need these people for our information, and they called it, I thought it was, they called our failures to like get the hostages in the first few times we tried a knot that cannot be opened. So they kind of were proud that they defeated us. Also, nuclear weapons in North Korea. Again, North Korea saw this as all our fault, and that I accidentally pressed that, but all our fault, and they were happy to make a deal with us, and kind of the textbook noted that the New York Times had read an article that said Kim Jong-un won those negotiations. Also, the New World Order is something that we don't really hear about a lot in the U.S. and in other textbooks, like it's covered extensively, basically talking about how European and Asian countries kind of don't like that the U.S. is large and in charge right now, and they're trying to, not make that happen. Basically, these are just some of the examples of how the history that we learn is very different from the history that the rest of the world learns. So, next, how can we apply what this teaches us in our classroom? So, we kind of learn from this that there's several different ways to teach things, right? So an example of this is that when I was tutoring one time, and I don't know if this happens to you guys, but when I'm tutoring, a lot of these kids will pretend they don't know anything that you're talking about, and then as soon as you start saying that, oh, I know that. So my favorite method for dividing fractions, which is in the College and Career Readiness Standards 6.NS1, which says, let me find it. It says, students will interpret and compute quotients of fractions, basically dividing fractions, and my favorite method is KFC. I like it because it's food. It's keep the first fraction, flip the second fraction, and change the sign from multiplication to division. And so I started explaining this, and the kid scrunches up his eyebrows at me, and he goes, "You're talking about keep, change, flip." And he liked it that way because it was in order. So those are two different ways to teach it, and it's based on our different ways of teaching, on our different styles of teaching, and our different styles of learning. I put it here under the educational psychology textbook, and also this website that talks about the 4 main styles of learning. I mean, we need to make this stuff exciting. When I was little, I hated history, and I hated it for 2 reasons: because it wasn't exciting, and I didn't feel like it was relevant. So these are 2 problems that we need to fix in our classrooms. So making it exciting, we can use different teaching styles and kind of be aware of the learning styles that I have here. And as an example, when I was a kid, my learning style is auditory. So when I was a kid, I loved cooperative learning. I loved those discussions. But for somebody who maybe they have social anxiety, or maybe they just feel like they work better alone and are slowed down for other people, they might hate this kind of teaching. So, and also using, like, even for me, I love, hands-on activities and fun activities, not only because they kept me engaged, but also because I felt like the teacher, cared and wanted us to really learn. So it's important to keep things exciting, and also it's important to keep things relevant. Like I said, the 2 reasons I hated history is because I didn't feel like it was exciting and didn't feel like it was relevant, and it wasn't until I got teachers who really used different methods and used different activities and made it feel important to me to change that. I didn't feel like, I wanted to be a doctor, which is a totally different story, and I didn't feel like these history lessons were any help to me. And in your classroom, you need to make sure that your students know that, or they are going to tune you out. They're not going to listen at all. So we need to make connections to the past and the future, and make sure we have relevant, real-world problems. I liked what Catherine was saying about how this pizza problem isn't really, good for students and everything. So make sure we use problems that our students can actually use and feel like that the subject is important. So I have some criticism for this book. I felt like a lot of the examples I used talked about U.S. history a lot, but some of the other parts of the book only talked about those world events from their view, from the other country's view, which was great, but I wish that they were more talking about what they thought of the U.S. in the book. Also, I criticized the book because it didn't really show, how can we fix this problem, like I was talking about, by making it more engaging and by making it more relevant, using the teaching styles and learning styles of students, changing the textbooks to include a more global view, and also having speakers, like people who have experienced things outside the U.S. to come in and talk to our students about it. So in conclusion, like I said, this global way of teaching history teaches a lot about how we can better teach our classrooms for different learning styles, and to make the students feel like this material is exciting and relevant for us. So does anybody have any questions?
We can stop our camera and give her a round of applause, and then you can.